There are places on this planet where rock defies everything we thought we knew about time, physics, and nature. Places where stone columns rise from the ocean floor like submerged cathedrals, where massive granite blocks sit perfectly split in two, as if an invisible hand sliced through them with surgical precision. Landscapes that seem to belong to another world, another era, and a logic that conventional science has yet to fully decode. You think you know the wonders of this world. You think textbooks and documentaries have already shown you everything extraordinary Earth has to offer. But there are rock formations in remote corners of every continent that have spent decades, centuries in some cases, defying the most rigorous explanations from geologists, archaeologists, and physicists. In structures that ordinary erosion shouldn't have produced, patterns that time alone doesn't justify, balances that gravity should have shattered millennia ago, yet hasn't. Today, you're going to discover 12 of these wonders. Not the most photographed or the most touristy, but the ones that hold the most uncomfortable questions. The ones that, when seen in person or even in a photo, force you to stop and wonder if the story we've been told about how the world was formed is the whole story. Stay until the end, because the last formation on this list is arguably the most unsettling of all, and science has spent decades failing to agree on how to explain it. The Lena Pillars, the stone sentinels of Siberia, rise along the frozen banks of the Lena River in one of the most remote and inaccessible regions on Earth. These rock columns stand between 300 and 1,000 feet tall, perfectly vertical, perfectly spaced, as if someone deliberately placed them at regular intervals along 60 miles of shoreline. Geologists date these formations back over 540 million years, making them some of the oldest natural structures on the planet's surface. What science struggles to explain satisfactorily is the uniformity of their height and spacing. Erosion from wind and glacial melt should have produced more chaotic, irregular, and random results. Instead, the Lena Pillars exhibit a symmetry that is statistically improbable for a purely random process. In winter, when snow blankets them and the Arctic sun casts long shadows over the ice, the site looks like a cathedral built by a civilization that left no other trace. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2012, their walls preserve fossils of organisms that lived in primitive seas when life on Earth was barely an early-stage chemical experiment. Egypt's White Desert lies 300 miles southwest of Cairo, in a place where the Sahara reveals its most unexpected face. The ground you walk on here was once an ancient seabed, rich in chalk and marine deposits. When the waters receded and the climate turned arid, wind and sand took over, sculpting the chalk into shapes that have no equivalent anywhere else on Earth. There are blocks of white rock that look like giant mushrooms. Others resemble animals frozen mid-motion, chickens, rabbits, human figures in various poses, all made of pristine white chalk. What baffles researchers isn't just the variety of shapes, but their scale and distribution. In each formation seems to occupy exactly the space it needs to exist without collapsing. At sunset, when the light turns the white to pink, then orange, then a deep gold. The landscape becomes so surreal that travelers camping there describe an experience that no photograph can truly capture. Ha Long Bay, on the northeastern coast of Vietnam, contains over 1,600 limestone islands and islets, emerging from emerald waters like mountains that chose to be born in the sea rather than on land. Geologists estimate these formations are 280 million years old, sculpted by a combination of tectonic shifts, slow erosion, and the constant action of the ocean. The result is a labyrinth of cliffs, hidden caves, and inland lagoons that for millennia served as a refuge for fishing communities who built floating villages in the spaces between the stones. A little-known fact is that archaeological evidence places human presence in Ha Long over 3,000 years ago, meaning an ancient civilization chose to build its daily life within one of the most extraordinary geological formations on Earth. UNESCO declared it a Natural World Heritage Site, but no official title can capture the feeling of sailing silently through the bay at dawn, as the mist clings to the water and the stone mountains emerge as if they were being born in real time right before your eyes. Alula, in the desert of northwestern Saudi Arabia, is a place where geology and ancient history overlap so seamlessly that it's impossible to separate them. Yes, the red sandstone formations dominating the landscape are over 500 million years old, sculpted by wind and sand into arches, columns, and monoliths that defy systematic classification. The most famous is Elephant Rock, a massive block that recreates the silhouette of an elephant bowing its head under the desert sky with astonishing accuracy, its trunk touching the ground and its ears clearly defined by the evening shadows. But Alula isn't just about nature, it's also the territory of the ancient Nabatean kingdom, contemporaries of Petra in Jordan, whose people carved tombs directly into the red sandstone cliffs and left inscriptions that archaeologists are still deciphering. Ancient incense routes passed through here, meaning these rocks witnessed the trade, diplomacy, and wars of civilizations the world forgot for centuries. What science hasn't fully explained is how wind reproduced animal forms in stone with such precision in this specific landscape and on such a massive scale. If you're fascinated by the mysteries the world wants to keep unanswered, hit the like button right now and subscribe to the channel. What's coming next is even more inexplicable. Mono Lake in California is one of the oldest lakes in North America, with 760,000 years of documented existence. It has no natural outlet. Water only leaves through evaporation, which has made its salinity 3 times higher than the ocean. But what makes Mono Lake one of the most haunting wonders on the planet are the tufa towers, limestone columns rising from the water like the ruins of a sunken city. Standing up to 30 feet tall, their twisted shapes look intentionally sculpted, and their distribution across the lake follows patterns that geologists link to underwater springs beneath the lake bed. The process that formed them is chemically fascinating. Calcium-rich freshwater springs meet the carbonate-saturated lake water, creating a reaction that slowly deposits calcium carbonate into structures that grow upward over thousands of years. When water was diverted from the lake in the 20th century to supply Los Angeles, the water level dropped, revealing towers that had been completely submerged since their formation. What no erosion model predicted was the complexity of their shapes, the variety of their sizes, and the sensation they evoke, looking like the remains of something that existed before humans even had the words to name it. Bryce Canyon in Utah isn't technically a canyon, but rather the eroded edge of a massive plateau where nature has spent millions of years perfecting a sculpting technique no human artist could replicate. They are called hoodoos, thousands of sandstone pillars rising from the red earth in shapes that change with every viewing angle and every hour of the day. They formed from sediment layers deposited between 30 and 60 million years ago, pushed upward by the same tectonic movements that created the Colorado Plateau, and then carved by a cycle of freezing and thawing that repeats over 200 times a year in this region. What makes Bryce Canyon particularly inexplicable by conventional geological tourism standards is the sheer density of its formations. Nowhere else on Earth is there a comparable concentration of hoodoos in such a relatively small space. And geologists have models to explain their existence, but there is no satisfactory consensus on why they formed here with this intensity and not in the thousands of other locations with similar geological conditions. At sunrise, when the sun hits them at a low angle, the entire canyon seems to glow from within in shades of crimson, orange, and pink that last just long enough to realize no camera can do them justice. Goblin Valley in Utah is one of the most unique landscapes on Earth, and one of the hardest to explain using standard erosion models. Thousands of sandstone formations with rounded shapes and silhouettes, evoking human figures or strange creatures, cover an area of several miles. It looks as if an ancient civilization decided to populate the desert with statues and then vanished without a trace. Geologists date the Entrada sandstone that forms them back 170 million years, to a time when the region was a coastal plain and a shallow sea. What turned those sediment layers into this army of figures was a combination of slightly acidic rain, wind, and the differential erosion between the softer and harder layers of the rock. What no model fully explains is the uniformity of their heights, the smoothness of their surfaces, and the persistent impression, consistently described by visitors, that the figures seem to change their posture between visits. The area was used as a filming location for sci-fi movies, and anyone who visits immediately understands why. The Three Sisters in Australia's Blue Mountains are 3 sandstone pillars rising above the Jameson Valley to heights of over 3,000 feet above sea level. Geology explains them as the result of erosion that, over 200 million years, wore away the surrounding land, leaving these 3 isolated formations as guardians of a landscape that looks more digital than real from certain angles. The indigenous Gundungurra people have a different explanation. The three rocks are three sisters turned to stone by an elder who used his magic to protect them from danger during a tribal conflict. The elder died before he could reverse the spell, and the sisters remain there forever, watching over the valley. What makes this legend particularly interesting isn't just its mythology, but its age. Gundungurra oral traditions are thousands of years old, meaning there is a real possibility they preserve the memory of actual geological events witnessed by humans at a time when the rock was still visibly transforming. Science doesn't rule out this possibility, but it hasn't confirmed it either. Brimham rocks in North Yorkshire are perhaps the most baffling example of what erosion can produce when it works long enough on the right material. These are blocks of coarse-grained sandstone deposited 320 million years ago by ancient rivers that no longer exist, sculpted by differential erosion into shapes that defy systematic description. One looks like a whale, another looks like a dancer balancing on a single point, another looks like two hands about to meet. None of them look like the result of a random process. In the 18th century, locals believed they were the work of witches or druids. Today, they are a destination for climbers and photographers, but the precise mechanics that produce such complex balances remain unsolved. Some of the largest blocks, weighing several tons, rest on contact points so small that structural engineers have calculated the probability of such a configuration remaining stable to be statistically insignificant. And yet, they've stood for millions of years without falling. Science has models, but those models rarely convince anyone standing directly underneath one of those blocks, staring at its pivot point. The Bentonite Hills near Capitol Reef National Park in Utah are arguably the most chromatically unsettling landscape on this list. They are soft hills of volcanic clay stretching out in layers of gray, wine red, lavender, pale pink, and blue-gray, as if someone spilled a painter's palette over the desert and the desert absorbed it and turned it into topography. They formed from volcanic ash deposited between 150 and 200 million years ago. Bentonite clay is extremely absorbent and erodes uniquely when it dries, creating a rippled, almost fluid texture that makes the hills look like they are in constant motion. The colors aren't accidental. They come from different mineral concentrations in the ash layers: oxidized iron for the reds, magnesium for the greens and blues, and manganese for the purples. The result is a landscape that completely transforms with every shift in sunlight. After the rain, when moisture deepens the colors and mist rolls over the hills, it feels like you're on a different planet. Yes, there are no official signs marking the spot, and no paved access roads. It is one of Utah's best-kept secrets and one of the most impossible landscapes to photograph accurately because no camera can capture the true scale or saturation of its colors. The Al-Nasla rock in Saudi Arabia is the purest mystery on this list, and the one that most directly challenges conventional explanations. It is a granite block nearly 20 feet high, split into two perfectly symmetrical halves by a vertical crack so precise, so clean, and so geometrically perfect that your first reaction is to assume the image has been digitally manipulated. It hasn't. The two halves of the block balance on ground contact points so small that engineers who have measured them haven't been able to build a satisfactory structural model explaining why they haven't toppled. Yet the crack separating them is so narrow and uniform from top to bottom that light passes through it perfectly. Geologists suggest that extreme desert temperature fluctuations expanded and contracted the granite until it fractured, or that an ancient fault line was eroded by wind until it produced the cut we see. Neither explanation fully accounts for the level of geometric precision the real rock exhibits. Adding another layer of mystery, one of its faces features petroglyphs attributed to the Thamudic people, an ancient civilization that inhabited the Arabian Peninsula over 3,000 years ago. This means humans lived alongside this rock long enough to carve messages into it, raising the possibility that the fracture isn't as old as geological models suggest, or that it's even older. And the Thamudic people found it already split and decided such a strange place deserved to be marked. Like this video, if you made it this far, and subscribe right now so you don't miss the next mysteries we're investigating. What's coming in the next videos will change everything you think you know about the history of this planet. The split apple rock in New Zealand emerges from the turquoise waters of Tasman Bay like a giant apple perfectly sliced down the middle. The granite is 120 million years old, and the official geological explanation attributes the cut to water seeping into a natural crack, freezing, expanding, and slowly pushing the two halves apart over thousands of years. The result is a symmetry that feels far too perfect to be accidental. Two halves that would fit together flawlessly. It's with a cut surface that is smooth where it should be rough and vertical where it should be jagged. The Maori people have their own version. Two gods fought over a sacred rock and, in a moment of divine fury, split it in two, leaving this permanent proof of their power. What's remarkable about the Maori legend isn't its supernatural content, but the precision with which it describes the visible result. The landscape of the bay surrounding the rock, with its impossibly colored waters and native forests reaching the shore, makes reaching it by kayak at low tide one of the most utterly irrational experiences of beauty this planet has to offer. White Pocket, in Arizona's Vermilion Cliffs National Monument, is the last on this list and possibly the hardest to believe until you see it in person. It is an expanse of 190-million-year-old Navajo sandstone, where the geological layers didn't deposit horizontally like the rest of the planet. Instead, they were twisted, folded, and compressed by tectonic forces acting on them while they were still sand dunes before they turned to stone. The result is a sea of swirls, frozen waves, and spirals of white, red, pink, and orange covering several acres and configurations that look computer-generated. No 2 square yards of White Pocket are the same. Every angle reveals a new composition. Every change in sunlight shifts which colors dominate and which shapes become visible. It can only be reached by 4-wheel drive vehicles via unmarked tracks, which has protected the site from the mass tourism that would have destroyed its fragile surface. What science hasn't fully resolved is the precise mechanics of how tectonic forces produced patterns of this complexity and scale in a material that was still just sand. Models of dynamic geology offer general frameworks, but the specific details of White Pocket, the density of its spirals, the continuity of its patterns across acres, and the preservation of structures that should have collapsed during the lithification process, remain a subject of debate among specialists. These 12 formations share something beyond beauty and scale. They are places where the Earth shows that its internal processes possess a complexity our models haven't fully captured. They aren't proof of supernatural intervention or lost civilizations. They are something far more interesting. Evidence that the planet we live on is older, more dynamic, and more capable of producing unexpected results than any textbook has ever truly conveyed. There are millions of years of history written in each of these stones. A history that the fossils of the Lena pillars tell in a language paleontologists have spent decades learning to read. A history that the petroglyphs on Al-Nasla preserve in a tongue we have yet to fully decode. A history that the colors of the bentonite hills record in layers of volcanic ash from geological civilizations that existed before any human was there to name them. The next time you see a rock, anywhere in the world, remember that it has a story that likely surpasses in complexity and duration any human story you could tell. And remember, too, that there are 12 places on this planet where that story doesn't have a final ending yet. Yet because science hasn't finished asking the right questions. That isn't a weakness of human knowledge. It's the best news possible. It means there is more to discover. There is always more to discover.